The mountain stood like a silent giant, its peak lost behind layers of clouds, daring anyone brave enough to climb. For most, it was only a shadow on the horizon, a story told in whispers, a challenge left untouched. But for the Stickman, it wasn't just a mountain. It was a symbol of every dream he had ever held, every fear he had ever faced, and every failure that had weighed on his thin shoulders. He tightened the rope around his waist and looked up, knowing this journey would change him forever. The first steps were almost easy. The ground was firm, the slope gentle, and the air fresh with the scent of earth. The Stickman thought maybe the stories were exaggerated. Maybe the mountain wasn't as endless as people claimed. But soon the soil gave way to jagged stone, and the incline sharpened into something cruel. His legs ached, his breath grew heavy, and still he whispered to himself, step by step. That's all it takes. The mountain seemed to listen, and in return it grew steeper. Days turned into a blur of climbing and stumbling. He lost count of how many times he slipped, scraping his hands on the rough stone. Nights were worse. The cold bit through his thin frame, and shadows stretched across the cliffs like mocking hands. Every time he wanted to quit, he would glance back. Below, the world looked smaller, like the past he was leaving behind. That sight gave him a strange comfort. Proof that he was rising. Proof that the pain had meaning. Halfway up, the Stickman met storms. Black clouds wrapped around the mountain, roaring with thunder and hurling rain like stones. The rope felt weak in his hands. His feet slid on wet rock. For hours, he dangled between falling and climbing, screaming against the wind. But in that chaos, he found something powerful. The realization that fear wasn't his enemy. Fear was fuel. Fear meant he still cared enough to hold on. And so he pulled himself higher, teeth clenched, soaked but unbroken. The mountain wasn't just testing his body, it tested his spirit. Sometimes it gave him false peaks, ridges that looked like the top but revealed only another climb. The disappointment burned worse than any wound. He would drop to his knees, fists pounding the ground, asking why the end never came. But then he'd remember. Maybe there was no end. Maybe the purpose wasn't to reach the top, but to keep climbing, to prove that quitting wasn't an option. That thought lifted him back on his feet. One morning, he woke to sunlight breaking through the clouds. The golden rays painted the cliffs in fire, and for the first time, he felt warmth on his face. It was beautiful, breathtaking, and it reminded him why he had started. Every climb, every scar, every sleepless night, it wasn't wasted. Each step had built him into someone new, someone stronger than the one who had stood at the bottom, staring in doubt. He smiled, gripping the rock, and whispered, "I am not the same." But the mountain wasn't done. Higher still, the air thinned, stealing his breath with every movement. His chest burned, his vision blurred. Each step was a battle against the invisible weight pressing on him. He thought of turning back, but then the memory of his first step flashed in his mind. He had promised himself he wouldn't stop. Promises are heavy things. They anchor you, they bind you, but they also lift you when nothing else will. So he kept his promise, even as his lungs screamed. At times, loneliness crushed him harder than the rocks. No voices, no companions, no echoes but his own. It would have been easy to give in to silence, to believe he was climbing for nothing. But in that silence, he found clarity. He realized the climb wasn't about applause or witnesses. It was about proving to himself that he could fight, even when no one was watching. And strangely, that gave him peace. Solitude became his teacher, showing him that strength grows quietly. One night, when the stars lit the sky like shattered diamonds, The stickman paused. He looked upward, and the peak was still hidden. For the first time, he laughed. Not in bitterness, but in freedom. He understood now. There would always be another height, another challenge, another mountain waiting beyond the clouds. And that was okay. Life wasn't about reaching an end. It was about embracing the climb, the sweat, the fear, the courage. The endless mountain was endless for a reason. He kept climbing, step by step, breath by breath, knowing he might never see the peak. But that no longer mattered. Each scar was proof of his persistence. Each slip was proof he tried. And each sunrise from the mountainside was proof that even if the journey never ended, it was worth every second. Because in the climb, he wasn't just chasing the summit. He was becoming the kind of being who never stopped moving forward. And that, he realized, was the real victory. The higher he went, the smaller the world below became. Villages, rivers, even entire forests shrank into tiny patterns, like memories fading into the distance. He realized how much time he had wasted worrying about things that now looked so small. The mountain taught him perspective. When you rise above your struggles, they no longer look as terrifying. What once felt like walls around him now seemed like stones scattered on a path he had already crossed. But perspective didn't erase exhaustion. His muscles shook with every movement, and his hands bled from gripping sharp rock. Sometimes he would collapse, face pressed against the cold stone, eyes shut, wondering if this was where it would end. In those moments, he remembered the whispers at the bottom, the voices that said he couldn't, that he wasn't strong enough. That memory ignited something fierce in him. He refused to let their doubts be right. When he pushed himself back up, he felt something shift inside. It wasn't strength in his body, but strength in his will. He began to understand that true power didn't come from never falling. It came from rising again, even when your body begged you to stop. The mountain hadn't grown easier, it was still merciless, but he had grown harder. Each step was now less about reaching the peak and more about proving who he truly was. There were moments of beauty, too. Tiny flowers sprouted from cracks in the rock, clinging to life where nothing should grow. Birds soared above, free and fearless. The stickman watched them and thought, if they can survive up here, why can't I? Nature, in its quiet resilience, mirrored his own journey. The mountain wasn't just an enemy to fight, it was a teacher, showing him that strength exists in even the most fragile forms. Still, doubt lingered. What if he climbed forever and never found the peak? What if the mountain really had no end? That thought haunted him, pressing into his mind like the cold wind against his skin. But then he asked himself, why did he need an end? Every day of climbing had already given him more than he started with. Courage, resilience, self-belief. Maybe the goal wasn't to conquer the mountain, but to let the climb conquer the weaker parts of him. With this realization, the stickman moved differently. His steps were steadier, his grip stronger, not because the mountain softened, but because he no longer fought it. He began to embrace the struggle, to welcome each obstacle as proof that he was alive. The endlessness of the climb became his friend, not his curse. And in that endlessness, he found freedom. The freedom to keep moving without fear of failing. As days stretched into weeks, he noticed something strange. The more he climbed, the less he looked back at the bottom. The horizon below had vanished into mist, and all that mattered was the path ahead. The mountain had stripped away his need for comparison, for measuring progress against others. Now his only rival was himself, the man who had started, the man who wanted to quit. Every step forward was a victory over that weaker self. Then came the silence. High above, where even the wind grew tired, the stickman found himself surrounded by stillness. No storms, no echoes, just quiet. At first it was unsettling, almost eerie. But then he realized this was peace, the kind that comes only after chaos. The mountain wasn't punishing him anymore. It was waiting to see if he understood. And he did. He smiled, scars across his hands, breath short, but heart steady. He no longer asked how much farther. He no longer searched for the peak. The climb itself had become enough. In every ache, every bruise, every shiver of cold, he discovered pieces of himself he had never known. The stickman understood that life is not about reaching a final summit, but about finding strength in each step. The mountain would always rise higher, but so would he. And in that truth, he found a kind of endless victory. And so the stickman climbed on, not as a warrior against the mountain, but as a partner to it. Each step was no longer a burden, but a declaration. I am still here. I am still moving. Whether the peak existed or not didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the climb, the endless, beautiful climb that transformed him from fragile lines into unbreakable spirit. The mountain had not been conquered, but neither had he been defeated. They rose together, endlessly,